Throughout the 2 hours of its sweeping series premiere, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power delivered cornerstone after cornerstone of Middle-earth lore, setting up an expansive status quo from which the story will launch, and offering plenty of tantalizing hints about its future. Based on J.R.R. Tolkien's own writing about the history of his fictional world, The Rings of Power nevertheless proved right away that it's as interested in blazing its own trail as it is in paying homage to its creator, introducing us to myriad new characters and situations that will all play a role in Amazon's epic, 50-episode grand plan. These first 2 episodes, directed with appropriate grandeur by J.A. Bayona, also raised plenty of questions about the future of these characters. What's in that glowing chest that Durin 3 and Durin 4 are looking into? Who's that hot guy on the raft in the ocean? Why does Celebrimbor want to build a big forge? They're all enticing, and they'll all be answered in due time, but even among these questions, another mystery stands out. Who is that strange, raggedy man who fell from the sky? Credited only as The Stranger, and played by English actor Daniel Wayman, the mysterious being emerges in a smoking crater after apparently falling from the sky in Episode 1. The adventurous, curious Harfoot Nori Brandyfoot, Markella Kavanagh, takes it upon herself, with some reluctant help from her best friend Poppy Proudfellow, Megan Richards, to try and relate to the mystery man, bringing him food and keeping his existence a secret until she can figure out who he is and what he wants. Eventually, she comes to realize that he's looking for a specific place, though he speaks in a language she doesn't understand and spends a lot of time whispering to fireflies. It's there, on the verge of more discovery, that we leave Nori, Poppy, and the stranger at the end of Episode 2, as our mystery man drapes himself in ragged fabrics and looks for answers after his arrival in Middle-earth. So, who is this man? Based on his general appearance, the color of the cloth he's wrapped in, and his tendency to communicate with insects, signs point to the possibility that we've just met a very early version of Gandalf the Grey, the wise and driven wizard played by Ian McKellen in both The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. Like his fellow wizards, Gandalf began life as one of the Maiar, a sort of primordial, demigod spirit created to help build the world in the earliest stages of creation. In this form, he was named Olorin, served the creator beings known as the Vala, and came to befriend and love the elves long before he ever set foot on Middle-earth. It's there, with the question of his arrival on Middle-earth itself, that things get potentially tricky. Tolkien's own limited writings on the origins of the wizard suggest that none of them set foot on the continent until 1,000 years into the Third Age, when the rising threat of Sauron grew too great to ignore, and the Vala decided the peoples of Middle-earth needed some extra help. The Rings of Power is set firmly in the Second Age, which would suggest that Gandalf's arrival is off by more than a millennium. Impossible, right? Not so fast. Because Tolkien's writings on events that predate The Hobbit are often full of gaps, and the timeline of Middle-earth is so long, the Rings of Power creators have admitted to taking certain liberties with history. We talked with the Tolkien estate, co-creator J.D. Payne told Vanity Fair. If you are true to the exact letter of the law, you are going to be telling a story in which your human characters are dying off every season because you're jumping 200 years in time, and then you're not meeting really big, important canon characters until Season 4. Look, there might be some fans who want us to do a documentary of Middle-earth, but we're going to tell one story that unites all these things. So, it's entirely possible that the showrunners opted to move up Gandalf's arrival in Middle-earth, to tie his story more closely with that of the Rings of Power themselves and give him a greater sense of awareness that Sauron's presence and influence lingers. That has the potential to change some things, but remember that when it comes to Tolkien's own writings on the Second Age, there are vast swaths of time in which we just don't know that much about what went down. That means the series has a lot of blank canvas to fill, and a lot of different ways to use Gandalf or a Gandalf-like figure. Maybe he spends some time in Middle-earth, then goes back to the Vala to report on what he's seen. Maybe he's not really Gandalf until the Third Age. Maybe something else entirely is the right explanation, but planting him here would certainly tie him even closer to characters like Galadriel, and his early relationship with Harfoots would explain his lifelong love of hobbits. As for his disoriented demeanor, well, for that we can look back to Tolkien, and this passage from Unfinished Tales. For it is said indeed that being embodied the Astari, wizards, had need to learn much anew by slow experience, and though they knew whence they came the memory of the blessed realm was to them a vision from afar off, for which, so long as they remained true to their mission, they yearned exceedingly. Thus by enduring of free will the pangs of exile and the deceits of Sauron they might redress the evils of that time. A spirit in a new body, sent from afar and imbued with longing for a paradise he barely remembers, would certainly explain a lot of things about the stranger's behavior. Whether or not it's really the Great Grey Wizard, and how much he'll remind us of the Third Age hero he'll eventually become, we'll have to wait for future episodes. What the critics are saying about the Rings of Power. Practically since it was announced several years ago, Amazon's expensive Lord of the Rings prequel series, The Rings of Power, has had many people predicting its doom. Indeed, the series' quest seems fraught with peril. It must win over a general audience and live up to the beloved Peter Jackson film trilogy of the early 2000s. And it must also satisfy grumpy Tolkien readers who have debated this material for decades. Stray but a little, as Galadriel might say, and it will fail. With the first 2 episodes set to arrive on Thursday night, with new episodes streaming each Friday, starting next week, the reviews are pouring in. Is this latest TV mega-franchise a catastrophe or a triumph? Brilliant or boring? The misfire many predicted or the one show that will rule them all? Read on for a range of opinions, along with other noteworthy recent features on the series. James Poniwazik, the New York Times' chief television critic, writes that in the early going, the series does not reinvent the ring. It does, however, add a few new filigrees, he adds. It immediately conjures the visual spell of the movies. More important, it manages, eventually and occasionally, to create its own swashbuckling, storytelling magic. Some of those magic sparks come in the form of a Starman, who travels to Middle-earth via a meteor, and a nuanced portrayal of Galadriel. A troubled, obsessed Carrie Mathison-like Galadriel may not be purely Tolkien, Poniwazik writes. But she is interesting. There are incredibly high expectations for big-budget fantasy shows not only to succeed, writes Ross Douthat, a Times opinion columnist, but also to set the direction for a new age of television, the age of blockbuster TV. The challenge for The Rings of Power will be to humanize its epic sweep and spotlight characters the audience can identify with. The show needs more politics and personality in non-magical conflict, Douthat writes. There's only so much you can do with sonorous elf talk. A scholar of Tolkien's works, Dr. Michael D. C. Drought, is wary of the trend to create franchises out of literary works, particularly, in this case, without the deceased author's knowledge or permission. If viewers are disappointed by the Amazon series, Drought predicts, it will because it lacks the literary and moral depth of Tolkien's world. He asks, can a company as intent upon domination as Amazon really understand this perspective, and adapt that morality to the screen? Is it a bad sign that the critic Darren Franick is rooting for the orcs? He dismisses much of the show as dull, bland, and boring, but he does hold out hope that future episodes will feel less like, now that's what I call Middle-earth. Karaoke. For now, he frets about finding laughs where there aren't supposed to be any, in the maps, more funny than informative, the special effects, almost Monty Python, and the plotting. Leon Miller finds that the first 2 episodes of the series come up short, despite being impressively cinematic with bravura camera work. It's all terrific, but it's all so familiar, too, he writes. Expanding on Tolkien's mythos and punching up the show's clunky dialogue would help matters. Language was a big deal for Tolkien. He was an Oxford Don who didn't just study languages, he invented his own for fun.